Custer's Alive, Book Number 2, the sequel, segment part number 4, audio, script version, written by Gregory Wright, G. the Writer. From G. the Writer Audio Network. This is Chapter 6. We will now be reading Chapter 6, Shame Before Forgiveness. Rector was ashamed of Sarah. It was just like a mom and a dad fighting with their own daughter, son or daughter. But that wasn't the case. The case was that Rector was ashamed of his sister. Rector and Sarah hadn't spoken to each other in what seemed like a little over a week. While not talking to each other, they began to meet other people who had seemed friendly by their own set means. It hadn't taken all but 3 days to practice this duty, as they already had it in them from the moment they had arrived at this new house. They knew that there would be changes, but that didn't bother them. It was those changes that changed who they were before they came to this new house to start a new life, a life from which they could become successful one day and change the world as it is. But to change the world, they would have to work, have to have the proper strength and courage to set forth maximum efforts. That was one thing that Rector had in him. But the question was, did Sarah have it in her? The ability to change the world, the ability to make the right decisions. If she had it in her, then she would have stuck with Rector, stuck with her and Rector's original plan, which was to stay out of trouble. But that wasn't going the way they expected. But at least they hoped it would get better. And that's all you could do in the 1500s. You had to wait and find out. And if you did find out, then you were off to go to a great start, depending on the situation and on all of its outcomes. But if you didn't find out, then you were stuck in the gutter with no answers to solve your riddles. But overall, your goal was to wish that things would get better and go as planned. But that doesn't always happen. Your best option would be just to stand back and pray to God, all while hoping that things would get better. Chapter 6.1, Lost is a Wonder. 2 days had passed by, as it was about to be 3 days in less than 24 hours at its max. Nothing was heard out of the rest of the family. All that was heard was that the family was going to be gone for a couple of days as a way to deal with the disappearance of the speaker lady that mysteriously went missing after her wonderful speech at their breakfast a few weeks before. No one knew how the lady had ended up missing. Rumors had it that the lady was poisoned. Other rumors had it that the lady had a heart attack, and someone happened to have stopped by one time to see that she was dead, all while finally deciding to pitch her body in a nearby lake. However, that wasn't the case, because there was still no sign of her body anywhere. It seemed as though it were something else that had killed her, possibly a very bad man and close legend to the family's history. It is said that every 4 years a man of some odd form will murder one of the family members as a way of Indian religions and customs. If all is true said, then the family can solve the case once and for all. But the family wasn't planning on that. They weren't planning on anything, to be precise. All they were planning on doing was taking a few days off from the natural routine, which was planning for community events and passing on the Indian rules of writing. It was no wonder why the family of the Wrights of the century were so rich after all. Their family knew how to learn money while sending out different solutions as a way to change the world with more effort and progress. It was as if the family knew how to make money without even trying their best at every living task, so much that many tares were beating through terra firma like a patch of rice and corn, meaning simple out of all means of reckless behavior. It was also beating through terra firma at least 2 times more than it was saving it from any possible threats or negative dangers as opposed to terra firma's history. There were vast protests causing the Americans and the natives to separate and go against each other. If you had asked anyone of any culture, they'd say it was dangerous and they would protest by all means. But for the Americans and the natives, that was the problem, and something needed to be done to fix it. Because the break that the family took, they told Rector and Sarah to stay back and watch over things. Granted, they had left a few people back to watch over them, some like Danica, Hannah, Joe, Christy, Pike, and Christopher. There were just six of many people in the family that could do multiple tasks, and perhaps their lifestyles defined who they were. Rich by all means, but they weren't rude and arrogant people as defined by many other rich people. They were sweet people, to be exact. Some that would do anything for you, even if it meant taking It was their own about a lives. Day after the time that the family left. Things were going as usual, as always. The only difference was that the weather was extremely cold. One of the people that were watching Sarah and Rector caught a disease of some sort. Another person that was watching over Sarah and Rector decided to call the nearby doctor to see if they could stop to take a look at the situation. The doctor happened to say yes and hurried on to the case. The doctor was there within a half an hour at the most, did the procedures, got paid, and was out the door with no time. However, the doctor's orders were not good ones, because the doctor would not let the person get out of bed for at least a week. The doctor also told that person that they could only use the bathroom 3 times a day and could only drink water and eat food off of the same dishes. That person was Christy, sadly. The doctor told her that she would be lucky if she even made it to her next birthday because of how bad the disease was. And after finding out about that, they decided to just hang around at the house. It was a good thing for Rector because Sarah and him were finally starting to get along, and it gave him some to write about in his book as well. Writing books was something that Rector was really fond of. Out of all of the other things that he could be doing with his life, he also didn't care about what others thought about his passions for writing. He simply just blocked them out as an I don't care. A few days went by. The family had just returned home. Rector had almost finished his book called Sea Dragons Lost of Tales, which was a book about the history of the lost and lost dragons of the Age of Dawn. And in his book, he described how dozens of sea dragons were being killed for meteors hitting the ocean floors. He was even going to aim at publishing it, but first he would have to talk to Zach, which was the husband and head boss of the family. He knew that he could get by if he just Welcome home, family, Sarah said just a few seconds after they had walked in the door. After she said that, she put a smile on her face and looked at all of the family as they walked in the door. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Rector. Hi, all of you guys. I heard that Christy wasn't doing too well. How is she feeling right now? Any better? Mark said as he walked off further upstairs with his suitcase. Better it is, Joe shouted at Mark as Mark walked up the stairs, saying nothing else except for, That's good to hear. Then he went off for his room and then shut the door behind him while setting the stuff on his bed, all while lying down to take a nap. Down the stairs, the rest of the crew walked in and greeted each while other, forgetting what happened a few days ago with the lady's disappearance. So how was your vacation staying here at the house? It had to be enjoyable in some ways, or you guys wouldn't be standing in the doorway. One other person said as they had walked past them in a rush to the kitchen to make a sandwich. It was okay, actually. quite boring at times. It's nothing out of the usual. We just try to stay productive, that's all, Sarah said, now walking over to shut the door, which no one had shut to begin with. A few minutes went by. More like 20 minutes had passed, and everyone had unpacked their stuff, put it away, and returned downstairs and into the living room by 3:30 sharp. They sat there for quite a while, by each doing things like Rector and Sarah used to do at their house. As you looked around the room, everyone was productive in their own set and individual ways, as to be no more than normal. Everyone was doing their own things in their own ways. It was just the thing that they did in this time period. It was when everyone got together and showed their own skills, almost like a talent show but completely different. Instead, this was a family custom in the 1500s. People just like to do their own things rather than listen to other people's gossip about dramatic things like, did you get this? Why don't you wear a shirt anymore? Or why didn't you get this? You have enough money. That just wasn't seen a lot in the 1500s. The only thing that you ever saw was people gossiping about books and about the different qualities and beauties that the authors and debuted while making their books pop out. It was no wonder why the whole process of making a book in the era was a wonder. You had people that cared so much about your books that they were willing to buy all of them for such high prices. They would often go to extremes to find your book in stores. But the good thing was they read them from start to finish, sometimes 3 or 4 times before they had finally gave them up. People had just loved books and would never give them up. Authors would make millions and go into retirement before they turned 34, 30 years of age. One thing about it was that books were a big thing in the family. They provided the family with comfort and entertainment. Oftentimes they were even talked about by numerous people in the family, and that was the only gossip they ever had. Other gossip came from saving the village from natural disaster, chaos, and murders, but that was a normal thing, and you could never get away from it until the day you died. 7. Rector's story, future time. About 10 years had went down the road, passing by like a vehicle without wheels for further motion and support. Rector had just published his childhood book he wrote called Dragons, Lost of Tales. It was crazy because he had nearly spent a full childhood on that book, but he lived his dream and he didn't let anyone take it from him. Rector was now successful. He also knew how to be a great man, which he had dreamed of highly. Well, since he was a kid. When he was a kid, he used to like observing the natural world and thinking about how to make major impacts on his generation. He also wanted to further progress the rules of writing, which was another one of his childhood dreams. Instead, Rector chose something totally different because he didn't want to be the same as everyone else. Rector believed that each and every individual human being should do what they want to do with their lives, so much that he got in trouble with the authorities and government officials on what he believed. He didn't believe it was right to take away children's dreams. He believed that it should be free for all, that people control themselves, not other people controlling other people. It just wasn't right to think of it that way, as he had thought. However, he had to make a change, and he had to do it fast. So he had to take on another one of his dreams, which was something that he had always feared as a kid. He was going to be a politician. He had always feared politics because of what he believed in. To him, politics were just people who gave up on their lives to discuss rules and policies, often making billions debating and throwing hissy fits over what should be what and how things should be. But he had to make a change somehow. That he had to decide, and it wasn't up to anyone else but him to make that decision. It took him a few months to make the right decision, before he came up front about what his choice was and how he was going to take the actions to do it. And when he felt that all of his comfortable desires were fulfilled with richness and prosperity, then he decided to take action, to live his dreams, which could lead him wealthy before the age of 50, possibly his retirement age leaked at 60 if all goes right for him. However, there were some challenges that he could face, only getting rejected by politicians themselves to lack the proper materials, expert background and character within the required levels of an experienced politician to simple things that could bite Rector later on if he wasn't taking proper steps and actions to complete all of the tasks correctly. Perhaps two possible things that could bite anyone going into any line or field of interest, but not Rector because Rector had Chapter 7.1 The Interpretation of Moving On. About a week had passed. Both Rector and Sarah had went separate ways in their lives, and even though they had left each other behind, they didn't leave each other with any guilt. Instead, they had left each other prepared for what is yet to come in their lives. They set forth new boundaries on what was right and what was wrong. The way they viewed life was really different from the way they viewed it when they were kids. They were now grown adults and fully grown in their own mentally and cognitive ways. What they believed when they were younger, they looked back and rethought their ways, forming new skills of problem solving techniques as a way to show who they were and where they were at in their lives before they left each other for what would probably be for good. Rector and Sarah hugged for what had seemed like forever. It had shown true symbolism to what they had gone through in their lives. They'd shared so many great stories that would live in infamy, but it wasn't over yet. It was also on that very day that Rector I gave some money to his sister Sarah for appreciation and for a good on that very day before Sarah left. Her and Rector took a walk down an old abandoned gravel road. The sun was shining over their heads as it hit noon. 12 o'clock, isn't it? Sarah asked while reaching out for Rector's response on the matters. That it is. There is no control over that. Rector pointed back at her in a calm way. Say, Rector, have you ever lived your life in fear, not knowing what will happen to you when you die, oftentimes asking yourself, when can there be a good day when you already know that tomorrow Sarah spoke out in search of words of wisdom. You know what? Those words are clever and they make you who you are. I want you to know whether you live or whether you die. I think it's best you know if you lived your life as if there were no tomorrow and you were killed. At least you can say that you tried your best and gave it all you have, Rector told her with some means of emotions. Rector, if I'm dead, how will I be able to sit back and say I tried my very best, but did not succeed? Sarah challenged Rector in search of more words of wisdom. I suppose you'll have to figure that out for yourself. Look, the best way to put it is to ask yourself, how can I do my best? What things will set me apart from others? What things do I need to improve on? What are my goals in life? When can I achieve these goals? How will I achieve these goals as soon as you can answer those questions, the sooner you will not have to worry. Well, that's if you choose to ask yourself those questions. You just have to trust your heart to do that favor. Sarah and Rector walked down the abandoned gravel road just a little ways more as the trees blew in the absolutely less than adjustedly fashionable manner like waves. The green blowing grass blew favorably underlying creeks and shadows of some odd forms. The sun's rays blazed like a steaming fire, burning land like coal mines and houses with fire and stories. Ants crawled into the gravel like footprints resting on a sandy beach, finding no more than peace and soothing curiosity out of both efforts and attempts. Just as they had started to walk back, the wind had started to blow as windmills blew around and around like twisters, twisting huge dips and creeks and sands blowing past our remarked location. What do we do, Rector? We're not safe out here. I think we need to get back, Sarah cried out in response. No need to fear. Just stay calm. We can make it through this. We just need to get back, Rector explained while hoping that Sarah would bear with him. In a moment, an old rusted up car flew over their heads like a scene from a murder movie. But that wasn't what was going on. What was going on was probably worse than ever imagined. A twister had caused enough destruction in a matter of seconds. Danger left fatal destruction. At least for anyone, tornadoes meant fear and worry. Get in the ditch, someone, something now, Richter said while the wind had tested his limits and his worry became an untested fear of the unknown. Sarah and Rector walked quickly, approaching the ditch with a matter of quickness itself. Get down, get down! After Rector had said that, they both got down as fast as they could, only this time they had seen a tree get pulled out of its roots and fly over a quarter of a mile before it flies on someone's roof. OMG, what's going to happen, Rector? Sarah asked with no hesitation. I don't know, we get these things all the time. I guess time will tell. All we can do is hope for the best. Rector cried out just a little, out over them. Quite a few ways. Barns were being tore up, houses were rippling to sheds, and grain bins were moving out of place. This must be how we die, Rector. This is just a shabby coincidence, Sarah said with a little more anger qualities as she held on to Rector with all of her life. The nearby breeze escaped itself, taking deep breaths and blowing the crippled tall grass back and forth like weak palm trees in a hurricane. The air remained stale as dirt and dust scraped up off of the abandoned gravel roads, sucking it into the clouds like slurping noodles. Only weakness had joined strength in the force of the devil's trap. This must not be done yet, Rector said in a questionable manner as to show that he was afraid that evil had won yet again. What do you mean, Rector? What are you thinking of? Tell me, Sarah demanded a worthy answer. Well, if it's anything like I saw a few months ago, these two clouds as they appear could form one, two, or three twisters at once. Rector pointed back at her, now answering her question of demand. What do you mean? Sarah asked, while squeezing him tighter than she was just minutes before. I mean, terrible, horrific. We could both be sucked into the heart of it. Just terrible, much terrible, Rector said, while stating an obvious point as he wrapped his arms around Sarah. For safe security, Sarah did the same thing too, except she loosened her arms a little bit as a way to settle herself down in case of some unexpected danger. For the longest time, the wind had blown outrageously, more and more. It set Rector and Sarah to believe that the storm would never end. Twisters had formed off and on like aliens abducting land regions and settlements. Grass was sucked up into the air and thrown out into clouds, leaving drivers confused and scared for their safety. And when the storm ended, there was nothing left except for a few houses and barns, which beat all tasks. Fish were thrown on the streets as rocks busted through windows on cars and houses. It was just a tragedy gone wrong, a disgrace for that matter. Are you okay? Rector asked. Then he got up while shaking the grass off of his jeans. Yes, I'm fine. Thank you for asking, Sarah explained, stating her reasons on the matter. Let's go, Rector said as he helped her get up. After doing that, they were off just like that. Hey, after the story. It had been at least a week later. Sarah had bought her own house up in Michigan. They said it was a pretty cheap house. The price was listed at $250. That meant that it was cheaper than Rector's house, which was listed at $500, along with an additional $653 for a car that he never intended to buy, but the landowner had given it to him because the original owner of his house didn't want it, and so he sold it to him at a cheaper rate. Since the storm, Rector had been trying to recover. Clumps of his yard had been thrown onto other driveways of other houses in this area. His whole dog fence had been thrown into the street. They had to block the road off until some guys came to fix it. They had waited 3 days before they had finally decided to show up. Rector's guess was that they were thinking things through. But at least they got it fixed. Overall, the damage had costed Rector a fortune. In the end, he had to pay at least $400,325 for the damage that had been done. It was an expensive way to deal with the situation, that's for sure. Other people would probably end up having to spend millions of dollars from their own money. Their insurance was poor down in this area. It was no wonder why they had spent so much in the first place, but at least Rector and several others made it through it. On the bright side, anyway, other people, not so much. Those people had to give up their houses and their cars, something no one wanted to do, but it was how the world worked. At least it was all part of a plan, an idea, of course. When Rector took on his political career at the age of 35, he set forth new ideas and political views that brought him fame, and it had shaped his life in many ways. When Rector had finally decided to retire, he was 40 years old, and he had lived longer than what was expected of him. Over the period of Rector's retirement, he had published one last book called Human Ways, which had brought him to the top, so much that he was honored with an award for great bravery in his life, and people had looked up to him more and more. When Rector died at the age of 59, he had earned so much respect that his book called Human Ways was given to many hospitals, libraries, and schools in honor of him and his awesome bravery. He was a hero, his sister said, as she died the next day from a massive stroke that set her ill at the age of 55. Though 10 years later, his story had struck many people and it had a huge impact on many people's lives. Rector Ray was now the most famous person in the 1500s to have never fallen in love, and his political views are shared all across the world in honor of him.